Are you a footballer who wants to maximize your performance to succeed at the top level? My new ebook, Strength and Conditioning 101 for Female Footballers, is now available. For free and instant access, simply head on over to jacobandre.com. Link is in the show notes. The Women's Footy Podcast is brought to you by Fitnessworks. With 3 convenient locations in Darwin at Darwin City, Nightcliff and Allawa, these gyms are world-class family exercise centres offering the latest equipment with friendly and fully qualified staff. For more information, check out fitnessworksnt.com.au. G'day and welcome to the Women's Footy Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Andre, and today I'm speaking to John Cybulski. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I normally check that I get the pronunciation correct. Did I get the pronunciation on your surname correct?
Dead on. Nailed it. It was perfect.
Oh, I love it. Cool. All right. So how I like to get started in every episode is to get a bit of a backstory on you. Tell me, first of all, what did we interrupt in your day today? And then a bit of how you ended up where you are in life right now.
Oh, my day has been severely interrupted by this entire interview. So we better make it good. No, I was just getting my haircut out here in Los Angeles today. So it's fine. I appreciate it. It is always fun to talk shop with you.
Well, real quick. What's the style at the moment? The men's style in LA?
Oh my gosh, it's all over the place. I can't keep up with it. I've been married for 10 years, so we keep it very simple. I can't keep up with the trends in LA. I'm not that guy. I'm not there.
Okay, cool. All right. So, because fades are real in here in Australia at the moment. I don't know. Thank goodness the mullets are gone post-COVID, but yeah, fades are definitely the thing at the moment.
There's still a lot of mullets around here. The variants of mullets are definitely here for sure. But yeah, the fades are more common here for sure. They're still alive.
Yeah. John, you're a chiropractor. I actually came across you on an Instagram live with Graham Tuttle, who's actually coming up in my next interview. He's the barefoot sprinter, of course. Absolutely loved it. I was actually doing a workout at my house in my backyard. Went onto Instagram for something, whatever, scrolling, checking things, and then saw this live come up and I thought, I'm going to listen to this. It was honestly the best live I've ever listened to. You guys were getting real deep on philosophical stuff and it was so interesting. And then I started following you both from that. And I was like, well, I love what this guy's doing. So super grateful that you have agreed to come onto the podcast. But how did you end up where you are today?
So I'm in Los Angeles now, but I became a chiropractor in 2010 and I worked for a big corporate company, there were 500 doctors, suit and tie chiropractic. And it was great. We spent a half an hour. It wasn't the traditional chiropractic in terms of snapping necks and cashing checks. Mostly what we would do is an hour of body work and then exercise. So a little bit more like physio or physical therapy, I guess you could say, rather than like the traditional American chiropractor. And I did that for 12 years before COVID happened. And then when COVID happened, my practice emptied out as they did everywhere. And I decided the patients weren't coming to me, so I would go to my patients. And I just figured out how to edit videos and, steal from guys like Graham and figured out how to create a social media following. And so, yeah, from there, there was a bit of I wanted to leave my company, but I wasn't sure. I had a great practice in Texas. And my wife had a very dear friend who has a gym out here in Los Angeles called Unbreakable. It's owned by Jay Glazer. He's on a lot of NFL stuff. And so there was an opening there and they said, why don't you come in and interview? And I interviewed, was treating the owners and some other famous people. It was kind of scary, to be honest. They have like kind of some big music names and stuff. And apparently I did well enough to get the job. So I moved out to LA and moved my wife out here. And yeah, I've been shooting content and rubbing elbows with people that are way more famous than I'll ever be. So it's fun. It's really fun.
Well, you mentioned your Instagram and we'll link that up in the show notes. It's the Anatomy of Therapy. And so you can search for that on Instagram. I definitely recommend following you. And it's interesting that you say that about the physio because that's actually what I thought you were when I saw your content. Your videos are really interesting and really extremely knowledgeable. But I actually had to look into you a bit deeper into your bio and stuff to kind of figure out that you were actually a chiropractor. So, what was that like getting started with Instagram?
It's tough. It's scary at first. Luckily, I had enough of a practice to where I just thought that Instagram was kind of just like a side project, honestly. Like I'm just gonna do this for fun. Because we actually started it, my buddy and I, Bobby, as a podcast. And then I was like, we'll just use social media to kind of promote it. And then during COVID, I was like, I really need to step this up. But it's weird. Like you have to. It's probably like the best self help. You have to really overcome some hurdles, to get views, but also do something that you believe in is valuable. Like to put it out on the internet and not just do BS for clickbait and stuff. So it's a fine balance, and yeah, many sleepless nights. Let's just say.
You mentioned a podcast. Are you still doing the podcast? And what was it called if you not anymore?
No, we're not anymore. It's called The Anatomy of Therapy. We've got probably 100 something episodes. We haven't done it in almost 2 years now, probably. Ever since I moved out here, things got hectic, and maybe we need to get back on it. You're inspiring me.
Oh, well, I hope so. I'd love to listen to it. There was actually a guy who I interviewed who I really like his podcast. That's it's just escaped me for a second. Rain, range. It'll come to me in a second. I'll keep talking and it'll come to me.
Yeah.
Uh, oh man, I was just literally looking at his video on Instagram.
It's all
Anyway,
good.
he's Canadian. And he was on the podcast and he actually did his podcast with me from the bed. So that was probably the
Oh,
most
nice.
interesting place anyone's done one. Not waiting for a haircut, but
Well,
it
we're
was
trying to we're trying to keep you on your toes over here.
Oh, let's get into the first question then. So,
Yeah.
can you explain the importance of spinal alignment for athletes?
Sure. I can go back and forth on this from like a clinical aspect to like a an athletic aspect in terms of say from pain to performance. I guess you would want to distinguish them because as humans we are vertebral creatures, and that is kind of our core, if you will. And I do martial art. I do jujitsu, and I know that if I can misalign someone's spine, if I can control their head, they immediately become weaker. It's just a fact. And so, in terms of spinal alignment, um, you know that you're sort of not at your best. You're driving on a flat tire when your spine isn't necessarily aligned. Now, there's also, we would say in Texas, a ditch on the other side of the road where a certain amount of fear can be created by doctors regarding spinal alignment. And so they'll be like, if you do not have perfect spinal alignment, you're in danger. The human body is incredibly resilient and can overcome many difficulties. Like the compensations have been listed as a bad thing, but our body compensates to protect us. So while it's important to work on some spinal alignment, I would also almost say uh, a spinal alignment variety or a variability in your spinal alignment. Be able to keep your spine in the line through a number of activities, I think would be the ultimate goal. Because again, the fear of like being out of spinal alignment could stop people, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
First, how is it understand over there? How do people talk about spinal alignment in your world?
Yeah, I'd say very similar. I think there is definitely a fear around people having their neck cracked, like thinking that chiropractors just crack necks.
Right.
But yeah, in my experience, I think it's a really good preventative, first of all, sort of modality to have done. And I just don't think enough people probably do go to chiropractors to tell you the truth. I think more people sort of go down the physio path. But I think I started seeing a chiropractor for the preventative stuff, just the everyday, rather than like, oh, I've got an injury now, I'm going to go see a chiropractor. And I think in terms of having that regular checkup with a chiropractor is really beneficial because it allows you to keep on top of everything. And so I think that's how I think chiropractic should really be used. It's more preventative rather than reactive.
Completely agree. I think preventative medicine is one of the most ancient types of medicine. There was literally a category of doctors who were like, this is a preventative medicine doctor, and this was a surgeon basically that would be there in emergencies. And there was actually a time where preventative doctors were held in the highest esteem, and people who were just like, because you could train a monkey to do surgery, anybody can do a shot, like, but finding a way to stay healthy is actually a more nuanced game than it is to give them some opioids so they're not in pain anymore. It is so, like, absolutely, those checkups are huge.
Yeah, and I've just remembered that account that I was talking about in the person. So it's Range of Strength, which is Lucas
Yeah,
Hardy. Awesome.
I love that guy. He's great. The old
Yeah.
school strength.
Well, actually, so I can't believe I actually even forgot because I was thinking end range, end range, end range. And I'm like, it's not end range. So Range of Strength is the Instagram account. Lucas Hardy is the man behind the account. And I was literally just before we jumped on this call looking at one of his videos and he was talking about like upper back extension and doing a whole bunch of stuff. And he was talking about how there's other factors that go into that. And for him to develop that upper back mobility and getting into extension, he needed to look at the other stuff underpinning that first, which was flexibility of the hip flexors, the abdominals, and then the shoulder girdle. So how much how do you work with people where you have to fix these other areas first? Because people might go, oh yeah, my upper back's tight, but they don't think, for example, in that video, that photo, they don't think about the hip flexors in regards to that.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I'm still practicing and seeing patients, and honestly, it's really demonstrating. Like, you can tell people all day until the cows come home that their hip flexors are tight, but it's really about giving them a reason to understand why that's important. And so with the test, we do sort of more functional tests where I put them in positions and test them so that they tell me what it is they feel that stops them, basically. And really, it's allowing them to discover more about their body. Like, I can list out a number of things I think are wrong, but until you really know the importance of it, that's when you start to take ownership of your own body. And then you're like, okay, well, what exercises do I need to do for opening of my hip flexor? And I'm like, say no more. I've got you now. But
So
yeah,
on that, because I know there's going to be people listening that go, oh, this is awesome. I love what he's saying, but he's in LA. I'm in Australia, for example. There's probably people listening in different parts of the country. I know there's definitely some in the US, but they might not be in that location where they can work with you. I know there's some stuff that you do online. So if someone, I would normally save this for the end of the episode, but if someone is going, I love what this guy's saying, where can they go to work with you online?
yeah, I mean, I do a thing called Stretch Club, which I think is my favorite thing. I've done courses and I do online visits as well. But honestly, like, one of the best things is Stretch Club. It's just a 20-minute mobility routine that I've been doing now for 10 weeks. We almost have over 600 members. It's growing incredibly quickly. And a lot of people, it's just kind of hop on and follow along and watch me stretch. At the very end, I wax poetic about like why I do it and stuff like that. But if you've got 20 minutes, it's $20 a month. It's five bucks a week. What Hop on and let's do some mobility. That's the best. And we do all sorts of weird stuff. It changes from week to week. Um, Stretch Club.
All right, cool.
Link.
So
Yeah.
link will be in the show notes and it's heading to the Instagram page, The Anatomy of Therapy, and look up Stretch Club. I highly recommend people do that. We touched on preventative measures. How can chiropractic care help in preventing injuries which are commonly faced by athletes?
For sure. So, with chiropractic, specifically preventative care, really, even in terms of like traditional physio care, you're looking for limitations. So you make a measurement and you say, oh, they can only turn their neck 20 degrees to the left. And then you make interventions to help them move better. It's really quite simple. So, regardless of if there is pain at the area, if you're not after pain, you're looking for limitations. And so then you're just trying to delimit those limitations or reduce the limitations so that you can move more freely. And there are a number of ways to do that, but really it's just finding limitations. Where do you feel stiff? Because all those little stiffness, those aches, they add up. And while you may not feel pain there, those are just opportunities for potential. And I think anybody that stretches or exercises sort of realizes their body is capable of more. Uh, it's just about finding where to do that and how to achieve that, I think.
So I'm going to go off track a little bit here and start asking some personal questions. Like I tore my left hip flexor. I used to be a sprinter, and I tore my left hip flexor at the start of a 200-meter sprint, a race. And you get that scar tissue around it. I want to know your opinion on like developing that. Does that mean, people say, oh, it's never going to be the same. Scar tissue is not as flexible. Can you develop the flexibility in areas at which you have injured and be just the same or better than the other non-injured areas that you're going to develop?
It's definitely more challenging, and you definitely have to develop a keener understanding of what is going on with your body once you have incurred those injuries, no doubt. But I do think some of those experiences will allow you a deeper understanding of how your body works. And the hip flexor just doesn't flex the hips; it side bends the spine, and it affects the obliques and the femur adducting, and so. And I mean, it'll ruin your whole gait, the way that you walk. And you may realize because of these things, if I walk uphill, it's worse than if I walk downhill. And some people might notice that as, say, a limitation, but I think that it's just your body trying to teach you more about itself. And when you do understand it and you do recognize where you're at, that's when you can start to make those changes. And so, absolutely, it can your body will never be exactly how it was, but that's sometimes a fine thing. It can be actually better. And if you're healing, I believe it can be better, be stronger, be more connected. You can develop more qualities. That's one of the things with chiropractic. There are the orthopedic like ranges of motion. You have internal, you have flexion, you have extension. But in chiropractic, we talk about quality of movement. So the fluidity of the movement. In athleticism, quickness, agility, skill. Your body can develop a number of skills, and you kind of, if you have these injuries, you need to develop all these different qualities, and it kind of gives you an opportunity to develop those, I think.
Hey, Jacob here with a quick message. If you're enjoying this episode of the Women's Footy Podcast and you want more fitness tips for the female footballer, I encourage you to join our Instagram channel, Footy Fit Fam. Link is in the show notes. Now, back to the show. Yeah, so in your experience, what are the most common exercises or stretches which you typically use with clients? What do you find is the stuff that most people probably struggle with that you have to work on the most?
Sure. So I wrote a book called Stretching for a Pain-Free Life, and I have 8 key areas in the body and the most common limitations of those 8 key areas. And so fundamentally, we're creatures that move forward and backwards. And so movements through the sagittal plane are most important. Now there is some left to right movement, of course. There's lateral movement, and there's also rotation, but they're to a lesser degree. So, like one of the things I think is very important is hip extension, which is your hip flexor would be limiting. So, hip extension, because if you don't get hip extension, you overextend in the back. Or a lot of times, it's kind of an epidemic in at least women's soccer here in the state is ACL injuries, and so that's also because they're hyperextending their knee. They have unstable knees because they lack hip extension. So things like strengthening the hamstring, strengthening up the quads, strengthening up the glutes in the sagittal plane forward and back are key and crucial. But yeah, I would always start forward and back, hip extension. And then there's another one that I think that's underlooked. It's spinal flexion. Like everybody kind of says, oh, I sit in bad posture, I'm rounded forward. However, that rounded forward is actually almost a straightening of the spine. And the flexing of the spine actually allows you to get into a better core position, which is more important for your spinal alignment. So things like a strong core and hip extension would be 2 of the biggest ones by far, I would say.
I love it. Yeah, that's awesome. So speaking of that, with the spine, with the flexion, what role, and you talk about people saying that they're always sort of hunching over, but what role does posture play in an athlete's performance? And does it impact it once they're out on the field if they've got that kind of, rounded back from poor posture or forward posture?
Absolutely. Your body is always working on itself. If left alone, dust will grow, weeds will come up. right? You will rust. And so whatever you're doing, you're getting better at. If you're sitting for 6 hours a day, your body is getting better at sitting. It wants to go to the lowest level of work. And so one of the problems between bad posture and sport is that in sport, extension is one of the most important things. That's where we create the most force, is when we extend or arch our back. Um, and so when you're flexing, and it's a nice place to rest. Don't get me wrong; it's okay to rest. However, um, it can challenge your ability to get into that extended state, which is where you create speed, we create force, we can create torque and power, which are vital in most sports, I would say.
Do you find there's much difference between male and female as in what you do with your clients?
I mean, maybe there's a little bit more of a hyper flexibility problem with females, where they're like, "Oh, you need a stretch." You're like, "I can kiss my knees," like I'm super flexible. And as I said earlier, there's a ditch on both sides of the road. You can't be too tight, or else you can't express the strength and power that you have, and you can't be too hypermobile because then you're just floppy. But yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest difference for me. What would you say?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, there seems this was only anecdotal, but there seems to be more knee injuries. You mentioned knee injuries with hyperextension, that sort of thing. When I think about Australian rules football, which you're probably not that familiar with, that it's only at the highest level, it's only in its eighth season, so it's only about 8 years old. I think there was might have been a year where it sort of was 2 seasons in 1 year, but and that was because of COVID. But I think it just seems because women's bodies are built slightly different, and a lot of the strength and conditioning coaches that I've interviewed on this podcast have talked about that there's not really much difference between male and female, and
Mm,
so when it comes to strength and conditioning, um, so I think the question was coming from a place of like specific to chiropractic, um, because of generally you sort of get that sort of wider hips and the knees sort of come
sure.
in, but yeah, so I think anecdotally in my experience, there's probably more issues with knees. But in saying that, there's so many. I've treated so many guys with coming back from ACLs and things like that. Um, yeah, in terms of training female athletes, I don't think that there's any difference. I think you should be training them exactly like a man, um, and in a lot of the things that I've heard come up on the podcast and have experienced this for myself would be in terms of prescription of exercise, where going to an RPE based sort of prescription, rate of perceived exertion, because of menstrual cycles and things like that, and being able to work harder at different times of a 4 month cycle, a 4 week cycle, as opposed to a percentages based, which is like we're going to hit 85% of like 1 RM, whatever.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think that's probably really the only difference from that strength and conditioning point of view. In terms of like training a woman though, like the exercise prescription, that sort of thing, I think is going to be the same. So in
I would
terms of
agree.
this, yeah, the spine though, through, like neck to tailbone, obviously, the same thing. But yeah, so I don't think that there's too much. But I wonder just around the hips and knees, and then as a result, the ankles, if there's much difference.
Yeah, if I had to say that there was a difference structurally, it would be just a bit more hypermobile, a little bit more ligamentous laxity, just because of the hormonal differences. But again, I mean, that's at a very minute level. In general, I would completely agree with you. Like I don't think that would affect though how that would affect their training. I'm talking more from an injury standpoint, I guess. And again, if you're training appropriately, you're training good volume, proper load, getting good rest, I don't really see why you would train too differently, to be totally honest. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what are some of the benefits of getting regular chiropractic care?
Yeah, I think the idea that, well, just because of Western medicine in general, we feel like we don't need to fix anything until it's broken. And especially athletes. I mean, I played soccer in college, and I started my entire life except for my freshman year in college, and it was only a couple games. And then when I got to start on the field, the week after I was hurt and I sprained my ankle, and I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want to lose my spot. And so, and I think if you're an athlete, you definitely will understand that. They ask, "Are you okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good. Let's go." And then, when no one's looking, oh dear God, it hurts. So yeah, I think if you are regularly taking care of yourself, and some of the best athletes do, the LeBron Jameses and the Tom Brady's of the world are seeing a massage therapist every day, and that's a bit extreme, but of course they're, professional elite athletes. And so they're not waiting until they break down to take care of themselves. They're always taking care of themselves. But I do think the challenge is, athletes being able to be like, look, maybe I'm not okay. And it's okay to admit that. Like there's a difference between, hey, look, on the pitch, on the field, it's go time. No excuses. Absolutely. However, you know, why not take a peek and stretch a hip flexor in the middle? Why not, look at some of the preventative care? I think it's incredibly valuable. Yeah. But I understand the challenge.
So, what are some of the common misconceptions about chiropractic care, do you think, in your experience?
Yeah, I mean the general one of the that we're just popping the spine, and that all we need to do is pop the spine back into place, and that everything is okay. And that was kind of a propaganda from the Mercedes '80s here in America, where they accidentally flipped. Chiropractors were getting paid for surgeries, basically. So, like, when the spine goes out of alignment, it's called a subluxation, and there's also a surgical procedure called a subluxation, and subluxation could be like 4 inches versus 4 millimeters. So chiropractic subluxations are minor rotations that we're fixing. Surgical subluxations are like you fell off of a roof on your back. And so, anyways, uh we've graduated from that model, and we do think spinal alignment is incredibly important, but we're now using muscles, we're now using tone, we're now using intra-abdominal pressure, we're now using gait, we're stabilizing from the foot up, we're stabilizing externally and internally, we're learning how the structural system works with the musculoskeletal system, works with the nervous system, works with the respiratory system. And so we're trying to combine all of those things these days, or at least the younger and smarter doctors. At least the humble ones are. And it's a complicated thing. But yeah, if you think that you're just going to go in there and someone's going to pop your neck and then you're going to be fine and good to go, I think that's a little wishful thinking. I hope that your problem is that easy, that you just need a little pop and you're good to go. Most likely, we need an evaluation, and we need to find your limitations. We need to find your weaknesses. We need to find your strong points. Um, and I think that's really hopefully where the field is going, because there are trainers that talk like that, and there are plenty of doctors who don't. Anyways, I'll stop my rant. But
I'm glad you brought that up though, because a lot of people do think it's just about the skeletal system and that popping and cracking. I spoke to a chiropractor years ago who said to me, chiropractic is more about the nervous system than the skeletal system. And you've brought it the respiratory system and every system.
yeah.
So how how do you think that, what do you think he means by that, that it's about the nervous system? I've got my, ideas, but I'm keen to hear what you reckon.
Yeah, I mean, there is the idea in terms of the nervous system, there's a parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The sympathetic is the fight or flight. And in relation to the skeletal system, when you're in a fight or flight mode, generally the extensor muscles are turned on. And so they're related to a general increase in tone or tightness, which is actually good for performance. Subsequently, there's also the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest phase. Now, you and I are just sitting and talking. So most likely we're in that parasympathetic phase where we can think clearly and we can digest, we can have a conversation. And so a lot of times though, we find clinically speaking that when you are in the resting phase, or you would say you're sitting down, you're in the bad posture, you're asleep, that certain parts of your body are still in that sympathetic or fight or flight mode. There's still an increased tone in the muscles that you're not moving, so the nervous system is responsible for. And so the idea would just make it, we would just want you to be resting when you rest, and when you go, you need to go. And that your nervous system could switch back and forth, and that your skeletal system would complement that. Um, that's it. That's the easiest way I can explain it.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you collaborate with other healthcare professionals in order to get the best for people that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I know that I'm limited. I'm married for 10 years, so I know my limitations, but and so but I also know that I'm going to do my best and find the best that I can do. We and chiropractors can do a lot. It's really more so about listening to your patient's needs and finding out what it is. We're back. Finding out what it is they need. And so it's also just nice to know people in your community. I've been working with dentists, even like it's some of these crazy headaches, people's bites will be off. And I'll have a dentist look at their bite and start to realign their bite, and their headaches go away and their airway opens and they can sleep better. So it's really just about listening and finding out what their needs are, I think.
Yeah, that's yeah, so true. That's funny. Like you would never think chiropractor and dentist going to work together. Like even if I'm lifting heavy weights, I notice that you clench my jaw, which most people would do, but for some reason it always goes more to the left, and then my jaw always feels out of alignment after I've finished doing, like, for example, heavy deadlifts.
It's true. And they talk about how your body mirrors itself and that your jaw actually starts to mirror your pelvis. It
Oh,
seems like you've
really? I
got
didn't know
this,
that.
it seems like you've got a little bit of a right dominant jaw and pelvis, I bet.
So my pelvis is going to the left as well, not just my jaw.
Most likely, yeah.
Well, I talk about the pelvis a lot because the thing that I love to talk about more than anything is running technique. And
Mm.
so one of the things that I find a lot of people do is their pelvis is too far anteriorly tilted. And so in my experience, and I'm nowhere as educated in this as what you are, but so maybe you can shed some light on it. But I find that that's what leads to a lot of lower back pain when people are running, particularly longer distance running. Do you think that would be the case? Is that it just because it's too anteriorly tilted? And so what I try to do is I use the analogy, think about a bucket of water filled all the way up to the brim, and any movement is going to spill the water out. So we kind of play around with rocking the pelvis back and forth, like anteriorly tilt and then posteriorly tilt. And ultimately, in my experience, I try to get people, if anything, to err on this side of tilting water at the back of the bucket, because if they can get that, then it's obviously not the ideal. They want to be more neutral, but if they can get that posterior tilt, which they're not used to, they end up having their abs switched on, their core muscle switched on, and so then they have a more power in each step when they hit the ground. So how with the pelvis, the anterior and posterior tilt, do you think that that plays a part on lower back pain in people running, or is there something else that I'm missing?
No, I think it's absolutely the case. I mean, the foundation for the spine is the hips or the sacrum, which is surrounded by, two hips and then controlled by the legs. And I absolutely agree that an anterior pelvic tilt is one of the biggest causes for back pain. But yeah, it's just because it's like if you change the foundation, everything else above it has to change. And even just getting someone to become aware by doing an anterior and posterior pelvic tilt, just becoming aware of where they are and how that affects muscles in the back and muscles in the front is incredibly valuable. Yeah, I I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So moving on, what advice do you have for athletes in order to maintain spinal health in an off season? What do they need to be doing in off season to maintain that spinal health?
Yeah, I mean, I think things like deadlifts are honestly the best. Like ultimately, you want to expose it to as much load as you can bear and then go a little more. Like, I mean, you were talking about range of strength. He does Jefferson curls. And there's something that you need to work on very slowly. However, if you can spend 3 months working on your Jefferson curl, flexing your spine down and flexing your spine back, again, you have to start low, you have to start slow. But if you can, like any good strength training, slowly and progressively build your tolerance, then you just become harder to kill, you know? And so, like, I want you to be able to, your spine to tolerate load and stress, specifically in flexion and then extension. There's a lot of rotational stuff out there that I think athletes are very quickly drawn to because it kind of looks fun. They're doing twisty ball throws and stuff like that. And but the problem with that stuff is that yeah, you can learn how to create power. It's nothing inherently wrong, but I don't think you can build in enough volume for you to make meaningful changes to your body. Like off season, yeah, get your rest, but really you're trying to just build a new level of stress that your body can take, such that when you go back into the season, you're not so stressed by those things.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to actually go there. With deadlifts, for example, there's still people that think that, you need to keep your back straight at all times. And I think that there's times when you do need to keep your back straight. But
Yeah.
Jefferson curls are a prime example of an flexion exercise, which is going to be great for your back. How would you, or what are you saying to clients around getting them to do that and getting them to go, it is okay to kind of to curve through your spine rather than always constantly keep it straight because you're trying to protect it.
Right. I mean, look, your spine is going to curve. So you might as well train it to curve. Your spine is going to flex and extend. So you might as well train that. Now, like if you are training for deadlifts, then you should try to keep a generally rigid spine for the transfer of power from, your legs to your arms. That makes perfect sense. But especially if you're in a sport that is going to require you to flex your spine and extend your spine or move it through a variety of ranges, you should train those ranges. And like end range strength is the idea that you would train those end ranges. Um, but if you're going to be exposed at it first, there's another guy who's pretty popular on social media and Instagram called Movement by David, and he does a ankle sprain where he kind of almost puts his ankle in a sprained position, and then he doesn't sprain his ankle anymore. So he exposes his body to that, and then he doesn't sprain his ankle. So putting yourself in that position so that if you're ever exposed to that, then it's not a problem.
So going, I want to ask another personal question. How much emphasis would you put on getting someone to just simply hang, grab onto a pole like a bar and just hang? Because it seems to be incredibly good for shoulders and spine.
Incredibly good for shoulders. There's just like the low hanging fruit. You should be able to hang for 60 seconds. If your grip strength fails and your shoulder strength fails, grip strength is one of the best predictors of your overall strength. You should be able to hold your body weight for 60 seconds if you consider yourself an athlete. It's just kind of a foundational thing, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so what's going on? I want to ask about another exercise, which is kind of like if you hang onto a kettlebell and you're leaning forward, you got the kettlebell pulling your shoulder out of the shoulder joint. I find this works exceptionally well for anyone who's got shoulder issues, particularly if they can't lift their shoulder up, their arm up over their shoulder. So, and then you kind of do that stir the pot exercise, 10 in each direction kind of thing. What's happening there where you pull the arm out of the joint and you're getting that extension or the lengthening of the muscle, and then you're doing that sort of curving exercise to improve the shoulder joint?
Yeah, it's just a really great decompressive exercise. So a lot of things will compress the shoulder joint and the tissues get tense and tight, but that is essentially just decompressing it. It's brilliant. Yeah, it's very simple, but decompression. It's great.
Perfect. Do you, wary of your time, you are supposed to be getting a haircut. Has your
Yeah, I've
time
got
come
to.
up yet?
Yeah, my time is up. If you don't mind. But you've interrupted my day. We've already started with it. We might as well end with it.
Yeah, exactly. So this has been such an awesome conversation. I've got to ask you a whole bunch of questions I wanted to ask. I'd love to be able to have a chat one day where we just get real deep on philosophical stuff and just have a general chit chat because I get the feeling that you are someone that could go really deep into some really interesting topics.
Definitely, but I got to get my haircut now. We'll have to do this again sometime, friend.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's been great to chat and thank you so much for being a guest on the Women's Footy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care. Awesome, man. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Are you a footballer who wants to maximize your performance to succeed at the top level? My new ebook, Strength and Conditioning 101 for Female Footballers, is now available. For free and instant access, simply head on over to jacobandre.com. Link is in the show notes.